Hello, everyone. Welcome. It's a pleasure joining with you in this space. Thank you, as always, for being here and joining me. I am talking today about the circumstances around Matthew Guerra and Savanah Soto and their unalivings. I did a more comprehensive reading just yesterday and have that posted over on my channel. I'll be sure to link it in the description. So if you want to go and check that out, and I do encourage you to, there's been a lot that has transpired just in 24 hours. But additionally, it gives us a lot of detail into the various circumstances and energies at play, motivations, etc. So if you like looking at life through a psychic intuitive lens and you want to be updated whenever there's a new episode, new readings, etc., please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. If you have any suggestions, if there's a topic you want covered, if there's a particular true crime mystery that you would like me to look into, if you have any question whatsoever, or even, something you would like to see me speak on or to provide a sort of masterclass or teaching on, head over to intuitivealchemy.co and hit that contact button. I love hearing from you, and I definitely want to take your questions and topics into consideration when making future content. So the video that I did yesterday was going from a very broad view, looking at the Savanah Soto and Matthew Guerra case and the person who was actually charged. There's been now three. At the time I did the recording, there were two people charged in that case. One was Christopher Preciado, 19, who was charged with capital Big M, the unalivings. And then his father, Ramon Preciado, who was charged with some additional things that I'm not going to state here after the fact, I guess you could say, moving of Matthew and Savannah, destroying evidence, quote unquote torture, etc. So when I made that recording, as I said, there was only two people who had been charged. And the moment I got done doing that recording and I picked up my phone, I pulled down the menu and saw breaking news, third arrest in yada yada case. And before I even, was going to actually open up and read what that was all about, who it was that was arrested, I decided to hop onto TikTok. You can go over there. It's at intuitivealchemy.co. And that's my handle, by the way, across the board for Pinterest, through, Instagram, through TikTok, Facebook, etc. And I'd love to see you all over there as well. But I went ahead and did a reading, and it showed that it was a woman, likely previously married, now divorced, potentially, involved with the father. And the two suggestions that I was getting, and I ended up by the end of the reading kind of squaring in, honing in on the fact that I thought that this woman who had been arrested, per what the reading was showing, was the father, Ramon Preciado's old lady. So sure enough, I went and checked, and that was who the third party that they've charged was, in fact. So just something interesting to show you how fast these things move, and how, again, the cards and working with them, both just isolated on their own and the insight they provide, but also with, as I do, my own natural psychic abilities, claircognizance, how that can really pull in so much detail and accuracy. Oh, and one of the cards that was in that TikTok reading was showing a figure. It's the Five of Swords, and it's showing a figure holding swords, holding weaponry. And it turns out, because again, you always read in the context of the question, and my question was around who that third party was. That person that was arrested, Mitra, I think it was Mitra, Ramon Preciado, she actually acknowledged that the gun that was used, pew pew that was used in the unalivings was hers. The one that Christopher Preciado used, the forensic ballistics came back and they matched the ones found at the scene. So it was her gun, her weapon that was used in the actual crime that was committed. So again, just always interesting, and why it's always so fascinating to reflect on these videos that are being made, to do this in your own space for your own life, and then going back to whatever record you've created, be it videos, a journal, etc., to gain deeper insights into what aligned, what didn't, etc. So now today, as promised, we are going into two additional readings. I'm actually going to cover the notion of whether this was intentional, but also whether it was done at the request of someone else. Was there a greater sort of motivation here that that we're looking at, that we're viewing? So I'm going to share my screen here. And what we're looking at here is the first reading, and this is focusing on, was this intentional or premeditated? And again, we're using Lenormand cards because of the level of just detail and the way you can get very direct answers. And again, we're doing this both from, let's figure this mystery out perspective, but also for those of you who are interested in learning how to read these cards, we're going to work with these in such a way that this will also be instructional. So keep that in mind. Now, Lenormand, again, if you're not familiar, individual cards have their own meaning, but the meaning we focus on and the meaning that matters insofar as getting an answer is what the answer is, or what the meaning is when we read two cards together. So reading them in a pair, reading the line. In this case, we're doing a line spread, 3 this time, as opposed to, I think we did 7 yesterday in the previous video. You can go upwards of 9, plus there's a bevy of other readings that you can do with Lenormand that are very interesting and very detailed. But in this case, we're looking at this 3 cards line spread. We're going to read them in pairs. Again, up here, I have what the card on the bottom of the deck was, but also what they added up to. So adding all of the numbers associated with the 3 cards and then reducing that to a number below 36. There's 36 cards in a Lenormand deck. So first of all, we asked a very direct, but also one could surmise yes or no question. Was this intentional or premeditated? And first off, what we see here is this key card. Now, key, anytime I see this in a reading, it indicates right off the bat a yes answer. So already my seeing the key card here, that tells me, yes, absolutely, there was intention or some sort of premeditation behind Christopher Preciado's, actions on that day towards Matthew and Savanah. When I look at the key card, this is unlocking, this is yes, this is gaining access to something. And when I see it in a reading, and especially when a question is phrased in such a way that it is potentially a yes or no, and I see that, it right off the bat, that tells me yes, there was an element of intent or premeditation here. Okay, so bear is authority. This is power. This is leadership, somebody, wanting to dominate or who is domineering. And it is coupled here with dog. So we're reading these again in pairs. So we would read bear and dog together. Now, dog is loyalty, it is obedience, it is subservience, it is codependent at times. This is somebody who wants to prove their worth, prove their ownership or their loyalty, prove their, that they're, deserving of being accepted. There's just a sense of trying to earn something and therefore saying yes. Now, interestingly enough, when we read these together, we look at a sense of wanting to dominate an individual, but also wanting to exert control, wanting to exert influence over. And this to me really speaks to something I brought up in the larger reading that I did. And we're going to look at it in the second spread that we are going to go over today, which is, you know, did this happen to be, all Christopher Preciado's idea, or was he acting on on somebody else's request or suggestion or influence? So there's something about this that feels to me that the intention was to dominate, was to take over. And whether that is, the physical component from what we understand of this, now, Christopher Preciado, by being placed in this position, had total control over what was going to happen to Matthew and Savanah. Or we're looking at it from, was Christopher exerting, had somebody else exerted their control over Christopher? I feel like both are applicable here. But additionally, what this is telling me is that from an intention standpoint, regardless of whether it was suggested or if Christopher Preciado acted on, the influence that he was subjected to from another, is that there was an intent to take over and control. And specifically those that were loyal, those that were following, if you will. When we look at the context of this case, and again, if you want the really nitty gritty details, you can take a look at the other reading, but of course also just take a look into some of the facts that we know of the case. Matthew was a known dealer of illicit substances in his area, and he utilized Telegram and social media to access and to otherwise advertise what he had available in his business, and ran his business through his phone and social media. So the notion of domination, of taking control of that facet, seems to be playing a role here. There's been some indication from people who happen to know the parties involved, who are connected to Christopher Preciado and his social media, that he ran, before all this happened. He indicates that he's a CVS pharmacy, and has his own sort of Telegram group and social media presence, indicating potentially also dealing or, providing others with illicit substances. So when we look at the bear and dog together in this context, it seems that the intention to take over, to fill a space, to take over the followers, the quote unquote customers, it seems the card is suggesting this also played a role insofar as the intention here and the premeditation, the act, and sort of what motivated the entire tragedy. So next, what we will read is we're going to actually look at dog, and we're going to look at this key. Now, as I mentioned already, key already indicates the unlocking of something, getting access to. It is an indicator of yes, saying yes. Dog is that follower, the loyalty, the subservience, the obedience, etc. So when I look at dog and key, first of all, that tells me somebody saying yes to a friend. And the second reading we're going to go into today will give us more detail on that. But it tells me, again, that I feel very strongly that Christopher Preciado didn't come up with this idea all on his own, that it was motivated and influenced by somebody else. I feel that Christopher Preciado was probably more the follower in this case than he was the initiator or the mastermind. But it also indicates to me that they're trying to gain access to have access to those that were loyal to and followers of Matthew. And the particular following he had in the industry that it seems that both he, Matthew, and Christopher Preciado and this other individual have connections to, have ties to. So Dog and Key is saying yes to a friend, getting access to those loyal followers, those customers. It is indicative to me of I just want to make sure I'm taking a look at my notes. Yeah, it feels, I already mentioned all what I had notes of, but it feels like there's something else that's trying to kind of poke itself at me with this, but I'm not really getting a clear sense. Yeah, it feels to me almost like this, for lack of a better word, is kind of like, you know, a turf war, wanting to take over one's turf, and gaining access to what somebody else had that perhaps, Christopher Preciado wanted a piece of or wanted to have a part of. And there's just a sense of domination and control. The bear energy is a very, very oppressive sort of energy. And coming in right as the first card, we know that it has strong ties throughout all of this. And, one of the final mirroring sort of pairings here we have is Bear and Key. And so we look at this as somebody wanted to dominate through access. So, gaining and sort of having greater levels of control, greater levels of influence, of power, and just like it's a sense of expansion, if you will. There's also a lot of times with Bear, when you think about before a bear goes into hibernation, they're eating as much as they possibly can. So there's always this element when we're looking at bear of having an insatiable appetite. And whether it is for food or for drugs or for, sex or whatever it may be, power, control, we always have to keep that in mind when we're looking at the bear card, because especially when we're pairing that with another equally strong card, the Key card, it really, insatiable, greed, lust, desire, in this case for what it was perceived as being gained through removing Matthew's influence in that industry that they're tied to. That is what is standing out to me the most with this. And it's a sense of crossing boundaries. That was another facet that came through with the Bear card and Key, is that this is somebody who is crossing boundaries, who is not respecting boundaries. And, of course, we can speculate, is this being done because they perceive Matthew as having done that? Or is it that, they're the ones that are crossing into his territory, wanting to take over his territory, etc. The thing to keep in mind too, and I just want to put this out here, is that, at the presser, the chief of police made it clear in his language that they were indicated at the time of finding the vehicle where both Matthew and Savanah were found, that the individuals were both involved in the sale of narcotics through social media and their phones. So though I'm saying Matthew, I should probably revise that to say the two of them. But I feel that ultimately, the actions feel to me like they were more geared towards Matthew than they were her. Like they were seeing it as being his as opposed to it being theirs and something shared. She obviously was known to associate, and likely, from what law enforcement has said, has had, her fingers in it as well. But that's why I was using just his name. But for clarity's sake and for fairness sake, it is, at least through law enforcement, been put forward as, this was both something that Matthew and Savanah did, not just one of them. So just want to be clear on that. So yeah, the bear card and the key card, crossing boundaries, taking over, one's territory, gaining access to it, insatiable sort of, lust for power, for dominance, for control. All of these indicating to me that, it doesn't feel at all that these are indicating that they're wanting to exert these from a perspective of, say, like a psychological, I want to, I'm taking and unaliving these people because it gives me a power over them and I feel dominant, I feel powerful, etc. Though one can say that, that plays a role anytime that, somebody commits an atrocity like this, sure, we can argue that all day long, but this feels still more tied to money, tied to what is, what we gain from this. The bear is out for something, and the follower, the dog is really indicating to us what it is that that bear is looking for, what it's going after, what it wants through its interplay with that. So it's again not read in isolation, but this is greed, lust, and desire for those followers, for those customers, for those loyal to Matthew and Savanah, insofar as that industry, and gaining access to them, and the sense of having this, expanding their reach, expanding their customer base, and therefore expanding their income and what they get. So as I mentioned, we add these all together and then we reduce them to get additional insight. Sometimes it's just getting also confirmation that, yes, this is what it's all about. When we look at what these add up to and reduce to, we get snake up here. The snake card here is it is deception, it's trickery, it is forbidden, it is deception. And so when I saw this, the first thing that stood out for me was that there was trickery or deception around getting them together. And I mentioned this in the previous reading. I felt it then, I felt it before I even did that reading, and I damn sure am feeling it now. There was some sort of deception that resulted in getting Matthew and Savanah in front of Christopher Preciado. And again, we'll just say that, assuming that he and he alone was the one involved in the unalivings in a physical presence component, perspective. There was something about what was said. They could have set them up in some way. They could have, said that they wanted to re-up on something, and, or they had something Matthew and Savanah were trying to re-up. And so they, some sort of deception or trickery was at play to get people in the same location, getting them face to face. And when we look at 5, which was at the bottom of the card, 5 is the number for tree. And again, I look at the bottom, it shows me a theme. It can show me additional insight, kind of just like the same when it comes to adding the cards up and looking at what that card is. When I look at tree, this is very interesting because it's about growth. It's about expansion. It's about, reaching new heights. It is, very much about, wanting to stretch and to evolve and to progress, towards something. And excuse me, when I see this, again, it just feels to me as confirmation that this was motivated by a desire to progress into, to take over Matthew's particular territory, those that he serviced, and provided to, wanting to stretch into that area, and it was a decision that was about growth. It was about expansion for the parties involved. We know that Christopher Preciado has been charged in capital unaliving, and if anybody else is in fact involved, as the cards suggest, then they too, this was business. This was expansion in business. This was gaining access to Matthew's, followers, his customers, all for their own personal gain. So again, when I look at this, was this intentional or premeditated? Cards say it was. That key card right out the bat tells us yes, that is a yes, especially in a yes or no phrased question where a yes or no answer would be applicable. Key card is always, right out the gate, yes. The other cards are giving us details around why, what was, the intention behind this premeditation, what was the motivation behind it. And bear and dog indicates wanting to take over followers, gain access to followers, using trickery with the snake in order to get everybody in the same location. And again, that tree card, growth, expansion, moving towards and having greater reach. So, okay, so we're going to actually go into now the other reading that we have here today. Okay, so now we're going to go over and we're going to go over to the next reading here. So the question again is, we're emphasizing, did Christopher Preciado act at the request of another? Was this, an influence situation? Again, 3-card line spread, and I've got the 2 additional insight cards down below. So we are going to start first here with dog and with rider. Now, dog and rider I find interesting because one of the accounts that a friend or somebody connected to Christopher Preciado had posted showed that he had been in regular connection with what is called a runner. And the rider card is all about movement, usually fast-paced movement. A runner is somebody who is typically getting the supply and running it sometimes over, state lines. They're running it somewhere. Let's just put it that way. I'm not a part of that whole culture, so I can't say with certainty, whether it is specific to a type of running. But regardless, I find it fascinating that there is that connection to somebody who, on their account, they're very, very open and out front about running from here to there and delivering this and that, and what they make on account of it. And that Christopher Preciado has that connection with that type of person and the rider card, and so what we see here is we see the dog card and the rider sitting right next to one another. So you've got the loyalty, the obedience to the rider, to that, that individual. That's one way we can look at it. I also see this as being news of like being visited by somebody, having a visit from a friend, having information, that is brought forward from or to a friend. So it's already, to me, indicating that there's an exchange of information, that there is interaction between the dog and the rider. And again, like I said, you really can't make this shit up. The fact that, the rider and the dog card are showing here. And I was just reading and examining some of the social media accounts that people had highlighted and were speaking of Christopher Preciado and this other individual. It to me is just so fascinating to see this come together, because this already is leading me to believe that it is the interaction between these two people, the information exchanged between these people, that are really speaking of this not being Christopher Preciado's, master plan all on his own. This was a collaborative, or at least insofar as there being other influences. This was, somebody that was egging him along, that was suggestibility here. The dog is very suggestible. Um, and there is a sense of kind of maneuvering the situation, especially with the snake card here, and I'll get to that in a moment. So already this is just for me very telling. I would say that this is certainly an indication that Christopher Preciado didn't come up with this whole plan on his own. This wasn't totally just his idea alone, that there was at least one other person involved. And they likely have, collaborative, interactions insofar as what the previous reading showed us, around business, around, their industry that they, how they made their money. So this feels to me that this was likely something that was come up with from a standpoint um, they're potentially being involved in business together and doing this on account of expanding into his territory, Matthew's territory, gaining access to his followers, his customers, etc., all to, for their own personal gain. I also, well, no, I'm going to actually look at this with the combination of these two cards here. So the Rider and Snake is indicative, firstly, of news. I'm going to say it's deception. It's deceptive news. It's deceptive information. It is it is using information in order to get what you want out of it. So again, when we're talking about influence, think back to the other spread with that notion of there being a dominating, authoritative, controlling sort of, influence at play. And the dog card is showing again here in this reading. And without a doubt in my mind, that dog card is Christopher Preciado. That's I don't really have any doubt of that. Maybe you do. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But when I look at Rider and Snake, I see it as, okay, this other individual, we'll just say the runner, for just continuing with that theory, is using information to get what he wants. So it feels to me almost as though this individual talked Christopher Preciado into being the one to do this. Maybe they came up with the idea themselves. Maybe they, wanted to do, expand into and Matthew and Savanah's territory, and that was something they shared as a sort of common objective or goal. But it feels to me that the Rider was the one using information for personal gain, deceptive information. And it feels to me almost as though it was, the thing that came out to me. And again, being that claircognizance is my predominant psychic ability, the phrase, who would ever, I wrote it down, who would pen you, who would pin you for the pew pew, holder. That is what came forward. And it felt to me almost as though that was what was being said as sort of an attempt to use information in order to influence and to push Christopher Preciado into committing the act. Again, this isn't to, say, oh, poor Chris was, you pressured into this bullshit. That's not what I'm saying at all, so don't get it twisted. But it does feel to me that the fact that, if you look at the perp walk, if you look at images that they've released of him or that can be found of him, he doesn't really fit the bill. He kind of, he doesn't fit the imagery. He doesn't come across as necessarily having, you just wouldn't peg him as being, the one holding the pew pew. And that is what immediately came top of mind when I looked at these two cards is that this was, ways of twisting and using information and news in order to exert influence and to get somebody to do something that the writer wanted to be done. So it's using information and news or what have you for in a sort of deceptive, manipulative way to get what was desired. In this case, it feels to me, based on here, that it was desired for, Christopher Preciado to be the one committing the act, and that there would somehow be some element of safety or protection for him, because who would peg you for being the one committing it. When I look at all of these cards here, oh well, wait, let's look at dog and snake. Okay, so dog and snake. We mirror these two and read them together. We look at a desire to belong, a desire to be a part of something. We're looking also at a manipulative friend. We're looking at an individual who will manipulate a friendship, or who will present themselves as a friend to get what they want, to gain access to something, or to, get you to do what they want you to do. And feeling as though, this seems to suggest that, and I would agree from what I feel of him and his energy and what I'm getting, that Christopher Preciado is the dog, the one that's, please accept me, please love me, please, be my friend. It feels to me that he is highly suggestive. There's a high level of suggestibility, that he's highly prone to, another's influence, especially to feel like he does belong, to feel like he is a part of something. So dog and snake, again, it's the desire to belong, to be a part of something, but it's also likewise in an indicator of a manipulative friend, of somebody who doesn't really have your best interest at heart, really just wants you to do their bidding, to listen to what they say, to follow along with them. But in truth, they don't really give a damn about you. And I really do feel that. One of the things that jumped out with this particular pairing is that the person exerting this influence and exerting this suggestibility, it feels to me that, in a way, it's kind of like, well, I don't really care. If this person gets busted, there's no way of tying me to it. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But there's just a sense of, well, life for me will still go on. Business for me will still go on. So it's no skin off my ass if this person happens to get away with it or not. So it's just an interesting sort of cap, if you will, to that particular line spread. So when we look up here, I believe it was, I guess I could just do the math. Yes, so it adds up to 26 book. 23 mice was on the bottom. So mice, this is destruction, it is dwindling, it is less of something. If you think of mice, when you have if you find out that you've got mice in your attic, they're slowly eating away at the boxes and then getting into your clothes and your old photos and eating away at them. And so for me, this felt like perhaps there was a sense of business dwindling, of clients dwindling, again, making it all the more, advantageous in their mind to take over another person's territory, to get access to their customers, their support base, their followers. But anytime I see mice, it indicates less of something. Again, that sense of destruction, that sense of dwindling, of what are some other keywords that I wrote down that came? So depletion, yeah. And flaw, it could just be that, whether it was Christopher and he has, he happens to do business with this other person exerting the control or twisting information, bringing information, just so often, or maybe it's more of, they're thinking of doing it more collaboratively. Or even if this person is like, well, hey, this is your thing, you're dealing in this area. He's a competitor. Why don't you take care of the competition and then you can creep into his territory? It doesn't necessarily mean that the person doing the suggestibility is in fact totally doing business with Christopher Preciado. He could just simply be the one kind of feeding him ideas. And in a sense, like, that in and of itself is kind of twisting somebody, say, and making some pretty poor choices insofar as what they're suggesting their friend do and involve themselves into. But I digress. But it indicates to me that whether it was Christopher's business or their business together, that there was a flaw in what they were doing. They weren't, as successful. They weren't doing as well as perhaps they perceived Matthew and Savanah as doing. They didn't perceive themselves as having as many followers, as many customers through, their Telegram groups or their social media interactions. And so there's a sense of the depletion, the dwindling of their own base, the lack of, they're getting more and in fact seeing maybe even, less because of, what they perceive as the competition. That feels to me as being a motivation in this as well, and what kind of drove the situation. And 26 book, which is what they add up to, this is knowledge, this is information, this is sometimes secrets. The book is open. Book can be open, it can be closed. The information can be out there in the open, or it can be secret, hidden, and otherwise not available. I feel like this can be relayed and viewed from a few different perspectives. There were some sort of theories and rumors going around that well, and there was even a video actually that somebody was posting of these boys talking about Matthew and Savanah and saying that they snitched. So it could be, well, we're going to take over their territory because, the rumor is that they were snitching anyway. So let's get rid of the competition. Let's get rid of the snitches and, yay, we can swoop in and serve to the people that now are going to be looking to get their substances from somewhere else. It also can just speak to the overall tonality and theme of this, which is information that is being provided and exchanged, used, for personal gain to influence, in a selfish, deceptive or manipulative fashion. We can certainly look at it just from that, very surface level, matter of fact perspective as well. But when we look back to the context of the reading, the question posed, did Christopher Preciado act at the request of another? It feels like to me, at the very least, that he was heavily influenced. By another. I'll come back. I know at the very beginning of going into this particular spread, I said that, this seems to be, his doing it because of another person. One could say that still applies, but I feel inclined that this was somebody saying, you know what, business is dwindling. If you're struggling, here's your competition. Why don't you, do this? Why don't you take care of it this way? Oh, did you know they also snitched? Whether this person sharing that information, has their own something to gain out of all of this or not. Again, we don't know from these cards, but it does, at least insofar as here, indicate manipulation with the snake and, deceit and deception with the snake when it comes to what they're sharing and the information. So it feels to me that they're, at the very least, is somebody who is exerting some sort of influence, who is making these suggestions, who's putting, or had put rather, the idea to commit this crime in Christopher's head. Again, it just doesn't feel to me that this was totally, his idea and his idea alone. Feels to me more, perhaps if anything, something that was suggested to him and that, he kind of ran away with. Um, so that's what we have with these two final spreads. I hope it gave you some additional insights to chew on and to consider. Again, really kind of sit with it. You may resonate with how I am reading some of this. You may not at all resonate with some or all of this. I encourage you to really sit with these and to look at them yourself. I'd love to hear what stood out for you, what didn't, if there was anything at all that you happen to come up with that was different. I want to hear that. It certainly isn't right or wrong. I always say, the cards don't lie, energy doesn't lie, and your intuition is just as valid as anybody else's. And it's through sharing about these things that we gain deeper insight and learn as a whole. We're always learning, we're always evolving. So thank you so much for being here and for joining me today. Again, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and I'll be back soon. Mwah.